Hi, you've reached the voicemail of Hannah Brett with Connect Call. Just leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.
1 for more options.
Hey, Hannah. I'm a therapist here in town. I think we met recently at a marketing event. You were talking about, working with adolescents and young adults, but more importantly, you were really talking about gender-specific treatment, especially for young adults. Failure to thrive or launch. I've got a young man, he's about 24 years old. He's been to a couple other facilities, but I don't know, they just keep bringing him home, and he's in the basement basically. Well, not in the basement, but he's living at home with his parents, and he's doesn't have a job, didn't complete school, and he's just kind of not adulting. So I was wondering if you could give me a call back so we can discuss some of these resources. That would be great. Thank you.
Hey, this is Hannah Brett with another episode of Connect Call, where I often say I don't have a clinical background, but I do have a PhD for picking up calls with families in crisis. That's kind of been my loosey-goosey tagline. It's corny, I know. So my guests today I'm very excited to have both of you on, are two men that I have kind of grown up in the industry with. I've got Mark Oerther, the CEO of Balance House, and I have Jordan Spektor, who's the Chief Development Officer for PACE Recovery Center, as well as co-founder also of The Practice. What else is, I'm sure you guys have a lot more on your bios and resumes that I'm not mentioning. But the reason why I brought you both here today is I got a call from a therapist, as you guys heard. He was dealing with a young adult male who had been to, I think, like a couple 30-day programs prior. And, I think what I wanted to really dive into and talk about in this episode is what is, gender specific treatment, why it's so important for like a young adult male to go away to do a treatment program, maybe for longer than 30 days, what it entails and how effective is it. So my first question is, why do you guys find it important to have treatment programs specifically tailored for young men, and what unique challenges do they face compared to other demographics? And when I say young men, can we talk about what are the ages you guys see?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I want to say how grateful I am to be on your podcast today. Thank you, Hannah, for having me, and to share the stage with such an important person in my journey in this field. Mark Oerther is a huge honor for me. So, Mark, thanks for being here. You have, like all of us, we've looked up to you and all of the stuff that you've done. I have to maybe add some fake stuff to my bio to keep up with you, but I won't do that today. But I'm happy to be here and have this conversation with you both, two friends of mine. And to answer, Hannah, your question, I think at PACE, what we see and what we treat here are clients 18 to 35. I think back in the day, maybe 5-6 years ago, it was more 18 to 30. And we're finding now there are more 30 to 35-year-olds who are, basically maturity level and doing, nothing as well. Like kind of like, from the scene from Wedding Crashers when Will Ferrell's in the basement screaming at his mom to give him some meatloaf. We're finding a lot more of these older guys in their 30s who are, as failure to launch as the younger guys. And with the exact same symptomology of some of these, 18 to 30-year-olds that we treated initially. So 18 to 35 is really what we call young men at our program.
You too, Mark?
Yeah. And I would say that that's exactly right. Like as far as what we've seen change over time, right? It's like you rewind 5 years ago compared to where we are now. We're like 18 to 40, right? And it's the 40-year-old that's still in mom and dad's basement, probably playing, for me, it'd be Super Mario Brothers, but for other people, it's like something that's more modern.
And that's a visual that we like to give families. It's a little dramatic when we say if your kid's still living in your basement, obviously your kid's not living in your basement. But what we have seen over the years is that young man, and it's true for women too, but that young man who might have completed college, might have not, really just hasn't figured out how to adult without mom and dad. So it's not even, I know when I was looking at cases when I was working for a couple other programs, it was always just kind of the same formula of a young man who maybe was struggling with mental health, some trauma, things like that. Nothing was never really dealt with. They may have self-medicated with some substance use and other things, or they're just basically, as we see today, like a different parent today, where, our family, what we are seeing more of is more of a parent not wanting to have their kid be uncomfortable. And because of that, what's happening is we've got these young men who are not ready to launch, to thrive. And there's no like, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. But typically when you go to college, you're leaving your parents' house. You're not going back in. I mean, when I went back in after college, my mom said, you have 3 months and then you're going to start paying me rent. And I was just
Well,
saving up to go to London.
yeah, we say it all the time here. The only time, we tell parents the only time your kid should be moving back into your house is with their spouse saving money for their first house.
Right.
That's the only time after college they should move back in. And we think, and that, COVID has reset the clock on a lot of these young men, and also gave a lot of them who weren't really interested in doing much anyways, the carte blanche to continue to do nothing. And then their families did not hold their feet to the fire, because really, where were you going to send them? Like, what were you going to do at the time? And I think that's delayed a lot of the young men that we treat, into their 30s. Like Mark was saying, honestly, we see it all the way up to, into, to 40, being able to actually launch into life and be successful.
Like, who is your typical client at Balance House?
Yeah, I mean, I would say typically 18 to 40, a guy that has, they're brilliant, right? Like, so the guys are not coming to us for
Right.
like a lack of intelligence, right? It's more they get stuck, and it's mom and dad, and trust me, my mom and dad bailed me out of a lot. So mom and dad will typically keep throwing the safety net, right? And then, so it's like they're just about to hit bottom, and it's either, yes, it's typically the catalyst is the substance, but a lot of times it's the mental health that guys have been struggling with for years, right? Whether it's the crippling anxiety, which, to Jordan's point, right, has really increased since COVID, right? We've seen where guys are not really wanting to launch, lack of motivation, right? And just kind of lost in their own life. A lot that have started college, but much like me, blew out in famous fashion, right? Because they just either weren't ready, didn't have the skills, didn't have the bandwidth underneath them, unresolved trauma. We're seeing that a lot. And I am so grateful that people are talking about the trauma, right? Because 30 years ago when I came into AA and got sober, right, it was very much, and Big Book saved my life, 12-step program saved my life, gave me life.
Right.
And there was so much more that needed to be worked through.
Right. You're so right, Mark. When I got sober too, it was really 12 steps, and they you saw a therapist and a psychiatrist, but whatever. But what we know today is, all that, substance use really is self-medicating for mental health and trauma untreated. So we have to get to that as well. But also, I think I want you guys to both talk about and elaborate on, how your programs, being that they're residential and there's an extended stay portion of it, you find is a more effective environment for healing and personal growth for these young men.
Yeah,
Like, people look to programs like you, and I'll often hear in my head, like my mom would say, I'd be like, how long do I have to stay? And she'd be like, how long is a piece of string? So for every young man, it is obviously different. There is no average stay, but what do you traditionally see, and how? We're all going to say it, longer is better, but why do you find your model to be effective?
Yeah, I would say that time takes time, right? And like, as
What is that?
time takes time, right? Like, having any kind of any kind of time at all. And our guys stay for about a year, I would say, right? And do they have to commit to a year before? No, because that would be like me saying I'm going to commit to the rest of my life. We as an organization need to earn these guys time. So what I mean by that is, all right, give me 45 days, give me 90 days, give me 60 days, and we will earn the rest. And 100% of the time, maybe 99, we do. Right. And that goes to, and I can as well speak to Jordan and Lenny and the organization that they run, is that it's all about the staff and it's all about the relationships that are created, that where guys will buy in, they feel cared for, they feel loved, they feel supported, and they're building a life that they never knew could exist for them.
Right.
And so you can't do that in 30 days. You can't do that in 60 days, but they build a community, right, over time. And yes, it's the program, it's the clinical part, it's the recreation, it's the relationships. It's the relationships with these guys that really matter.
Jordan, before I go to you, let me just explain to the viewers and listeners who don't understand. So for the longest time, and tell me if I'm wrong, there was always these 30-day residential stays, right? And then typically back in the day, when you were done with that, you would go to what's called a quote unquote sober living, right? And what people found in places that I'd worked for in the past and you guys found, there was a gap in the market, right? Because sober living traditionally was you would be all in the structure of residential and then go to sober living and they'd be like, all right, go get a job, go to meetings and be back at a certain time. But no one showed us how to walk out that door, how to have life skills, how to even apply to a school again, and it sounds crazy, but like when I stopped drinking and drugging, first of all, it did not take 30 days. It took me 30 days to maybe clear up my head and detox, but it, it, it was practicing all these new life skills without having substances involved or having, to some of these guys, having mom and dad hold their hand, like we used to do life skills bus classes and how to sign up for a class or how to go food shopping and have like a good food list, So I think where you guys came in, where all these programs started for young men, especially, where we call them more of an extended stay, a structured extended stay, where the way I can describe it to people is like, they're coming out of treatment, we're holding their hand, and then slowly we're letting go, right? But we're doing it slower is faster. And that's always been like what I love about both of your programs is, and listen, I would like to say, when people do ask how long, I'm like, I really don't know. Everybody's different, right? It's how your brain and how you are going to show up, But with that being said, like, and Jordan, let me know, like, what is your minimum stay with your program, or like when
Yeah.
on average?
Yeah. I mean, I would,
Yes.
ours is typically 6 months to a year. I mean, the gold standard at Pace, and I'm sure at Bounce House, because they just said it, is, to get that year mark of
Right.
programming, and I remember when I was going through this, my dad heard that you have 4 times better chance of long-term success if you stay in programming for a year. And so that's the gold standard. We want them to be here at least a year. I think 6 months to a year nowadays is kind of what we're seeing. I heard it early on. Mark says time takes time. I heard it early on. I'm sure you guys did. Like, if you were struggling and you wanted to know how long it was going to take till you started to feel better or whatever, they would say, well, if you spent 8 years, if your disease was 8 years, or, you've been experiencing trouble for 8 years, you've walked into the woods for 8 years. In order to get back out of the woods, it's going to take you, you have to go back the way you came, and that would take another 8 years. Now, that's just an analogy, basically, reaffirming what Mark said, that, it takes time to rewrite everything, all of the wrong turns and, all of the, the wandering into the woods. And so it takes time to come out. And so even in the professional program that we run, you're seeing that, pilots and doctors, I mean, their mandatory treatment now is around 90 days. So even professionals who have advanced degrees and are doing some of the most important work in our country, when they're, caught either with burnout or, substance use or mental health issues, they're required to take a lot of time. So with young adults who, like you said, Hannah, they don't, their self-esteem is, very low. Their self-worth is low. They don't have college degrees. A lot of them, even if they do, like myself, I had my college degree, but I didn't know how to live my life. I didn't know how to do my laundry or, properly shop and cook for myself. And so with young adults, it just takes a lot longer to, relearn how to live. I think
And for
beyond that,
families, I feel like the families need time to like
sure.
do themselves as well and to work on themselves,
Right.
you
And,
know?
and absolutely. And like at Balance House, a young man needs to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of family and a sense of home. And I think a long-term treatment, program gives them the chance to create healthy attachments around positive young people. Like we call it positive peer pressure here. Most families like that. I mean, one time there was a family that didn't like that, but positive peer pressure, the way it's like, guys are, to get out of pace, you got to go to school, you got to get a job. That's what is the cool thing to do here, is to advance through the program. And to create like sustainability and wellness with young adults who, again, basically their parents have done everything for them their whole life, including myself when I was going through this. And so they need to relearn how to live on their own, because the goal for any young person is to be able to provide for themselves and be able to live, to be able to, earn a living. That feels better than, than anything else. And so I think it just takes time to get to that point. We're like redoing a lot of, teaching on how to get there. And so like, we have 3 phases. I know Balance House has phases. And so the first phase of that residential, and people are, getting settled and getting the clinical work, addressing the underlying trauma and anything that, factored into the substance use, if there is substance use. And then by the time they're done with that, it's like, okay, you're going to start getting your phone back. And then what does that look like? And so it just takes time,
We
because
start
it's like this with young
practice
people.
phase and
Yeah.
then we kick off. And let me just stress that for people, because it's going to go into my next question. I get, and I'm sure you guys do too, and we're going to talk about this, about what typical treatment costs and, insurance and what we'll pay and what won't and all that. But typically what I will find is I will find the family who has tried a few 30-day in-network with their insurance programs that their son or daughter, but son went to. And they're exhausted because this is the 3rd program now. He is left right after 30 days and, he's not been fixed. So, like, obviously you and I, and we all know this, like, that wasn't the way to go. The way to go probably from the jump was to do something like a Balance House or a PACE recovery center, just because, if you do it, what's the saying? If you do it, I don't remember, but longer is better. But everybody wants to find out and do this 30-day and just go back to home and try to go back to work. But what do you say to those families that are completely financially and emotionally exhausted? And they're like, I don't know if this is going to work this time. It didn't work the last few times, because your programs are so different.
Yeah. I mean, we hear it, right? I for sure hear it, where it's like, it's kind of the opposite, right? Like the standard is the opposite of what you said, which is longer is better, right? But they're like, the shorter is better, right? It's that shiny object. And a lot of times the timeline doesn't match the problem, right? It's exactly what Jordan was referencing, which is it takes so long that we've walked into this problem. I created a lifetime of nightmares for my parents. And I was,
Right.
by the time I was 21, right? And so to get a sense of normalcy around me and in me, it took time. Yes, like for sure, people want to do the 30 days. I think it takes 30, if not 60 days for the brain to catch up to the body, where, right, where like I am thinking normally and understanding, because that's just the treatment aspect of things. And then you still have the life to learn how to lead of, I didn't know how to be a human being, right?
Right.
Like when I got sober, right? Like I didn't know how to be a productive member of society. And, I didn't know what purpose meant. And so these are the things that I feel like these guys are
Yes. Yes.
missing, right? Because if I go to treatment, which I did, by the way, went to a 30-day stay, it is so easy for me to go backwards, right? Because I went back to the same environment, made the same decisions, and hung out with the same people. Time gives you time. Time gives you protection. And yeah, I mean, it is for sure an investment, right? Of financially for the families and or the clients, right? We've had some guys that have paid for themselves, understanding that they're investing in their future.
I think,
Yeah.
go on, Jor, you go.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I just to piggyback on Mark was saying, I think, we get, families that, they spend all this money either on a 30-day program and then they take them home, or they spend money on a 30-day program. They don't set up sufficient aftercare planning wherever they're going back to. And, even, our first phase is 90-day minimum. That's what we require at PACE. So if you come here, I mean, we require 90-day, that somebody's going to be here for 90 days, that first commitment. And then when, families are pulling their kids home after 90 days, we say, what are they going back to? What are they, what are they even going back to? Most of the guys that come to PACE, they finally have more friends they've ever had in their life. When they're at home, they've been isolating, like Mark was saying, in their basement playing video games, gambling, we're seeing so much of now, basically not even able to, even be social. They're on their phone so much. So like, everyone's, hurrying up to get home. But what are you even, what is that? What are you even doing at home? You're going to go back to where you have unhealthy friends or no friends. You're going to go back in your room. It's like, parents have a really easy, their forgetter part of their brain is very strong because they don't realize a lot of times where they were at even 30 days ago or at the beginning of this process when they're calling us from psych hospitals or, just like the crazy situations before they would take action to come to a Bounce House or PACE. And, we always say to them, like, where, what is the plan now? Like, what do they have at home? And try to get the families to see that there really is nothing left for them at home. Maybe one day they can go back there after they take the time to build a life up for themselves. But for now, they have more friends they've ever had in their lives. They're part of like what we call the PACE brotherhood here. And, and I think, that, giving it another shot, finding a place that can be with someone long-term, they're with their same therapist over the course of time here, the same psychiatrist, the treatment team at both programs, I'm sure know these clients all the way through. And so by giving them the chance to be somewhere long-term, they're giving them, giving their loved one a chance to be successful long-term.
And this is what I wish insurance companies would listen to as well. And all families, if you hear nothing else, hear this. For any individual going into treatment, right? That's, your stuff is being fed by some anxiety, depression, bipolar, you name it. Medications are tried out. This is not a quick fix, To taper off a medication can take a month. To then add a medication and feel a shift, it could take a month to 6 weeks. So, we need time. What did you say? Time heals time? Time makes time?
Time takes time.
Time takes time. It really does. And here's where there's the disconnect, and it's unfortunate. Listen, there are many families I talk to that will be like, I need to know when my son can return to Brown, da 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 da. And I'll be like, stop.
For sure. Yep.
Well, but what we are going to do is that check that you're writing to Brown next semester, you're going to be writing to the treatment center because this is a better investment for your child. A lot of families get hung up on they have to stay on course, but if they are just not thriving, surviving, and living, like there's no point in doing that. It's a horrible investment of your money. But then there's a lot of families I find where this is expensive. They have to find the resources. It's easy for us to say, how long's a piece of string or year minimum or, I always say, even if you're not in residential, you should be following some sort of clinical recommendations up until a year, whether it's your relationships, your job, what car to get, whether you should do A, B, and C, get a plan or a pet. Everything should be dictated over by like clinical something, therapist, somebody should be dictating stuff for you for that year. But for those families, can you kind of explain, obviously there's a cost to this treatment, but and I want to stress this. I couldn't think of the name of the fund, but there are funds out there that I'm going to put in the show notes that families can apply to for financial aid for some of these treatment programs that will match whatever the fund will give you. But you guys, the clinical stuff is paid by insurance, correct?
I mean, it depends on policy and company. Like, we are what's called an out-of-network provider, right? We are not in network with any insurance companies, and that's by design, right? And why we do that is that there's typically regulations as far as like length of time and what in-network contracts will allow versus out-of-network, which is we are literally aligned with the families. Like, we want them to get as much reimbursement as they possibly can. We will provide all of the documentation, all of the assessments, and all the claims that are necessary for a family to get reimbursed. So that is where, as what we do. So upon admission, right, like the families will be paying the tuition, and then we quickly get to work on the reimbursement process.
Yeah. And let me stress this. And again, this is, especially with the families who have sent their kids to a private school and then they're like private college or university and say they don't have the money for this type of treatment. You're just literally switching. You're just investing in because what will happen with these young men, tell me if I'm wrong, but by the time they're leaving your programs, this is what we did with the program I worked for, is we would have them then, if they were in school and we were pulling them out, we would have them start looking at universities and colleges in the country that had a recovery or mental health component to the campus, which would support them, because very rare I'd see a kid there was one kid that I'd pull him out of one campus that he'd go return to that after the treatment.
Yeah. And we see the same thing. Like the one cool thing about Salt Lake has been, like, we see a lot of families from the East Coast for whatever reason. The typical line is, I'll never stay in Utah. And then they end up staying in Utah, right? And they may end up going to the local university. The thing that we see, which is very appealing to families, that, like Jordan was talking about with the phase system, we have the fourth phase, which is apartments that we own, where guys move in and they're paying part of their rent, right? So parents, of course, love that part of it. And by the time they're leaving, they should have at least $5,000 to $10,000 saved in their account, right? Because we do not want them going backwards, right? They're working part-time. We don't want them working full-time, because then they'll get too busy and forget why they're actually here. But if they're working part-time and they're able to save and do all those things, and guys are wanting to go back to school, right? Because they're clear-headed. And, back to what I said before, these are some of the most brilliant guys I've ever met, right? And they just need a little bit of direction, right? And, navigation through their life in order to figure it out.
I always used to say to young adults when I tell my story, if you used your powers for good and not evil, you know what I mean? Like, don't mess with somebody who gets addicted to something, because what we want, I try to go after, I hate to say it, no, I'm not going to say it, but I would go after life the kind of way I'd go after that next high, that next fix.
100%. Yeah.
And I think what's important is, and I need to stress this, when I left treatment the first couple times, like, I just remember even going into a restaurant and having to pick up my to-go order at the bar. Like, no one teaches you these things. And that's why, like, I have to tell you, the work that you two are doing and the programs that you guys have, to me, and the extended portion of that is as important, if not more important than, you know what I mean? Because it's really it's the practicing of getting them, and when parents don't get that, we just, we ask them to, try to learn a language in 30 days, get back to us on that, or.
I love that you just shared that, because So I got sober in South Carolina, and they sell alcohol in the grocery stores. And so
Right.
for a year, I would avoid that aisle, even though I needed something that was down the aisle other than, right. And so, yes, no
So
one,
you had to do that aisle.
no, right. No one teaches you that, like, you're not going to get bit, or you're not going to catch on, right. You're not going to catch on fire or whatever. And it's like normalizing life for these guys. And, the three people that are on this call, right? All of us got sober younger, right? So, like, there's a relatability factor that, when I may or may not have gone through a lot of therapists when I was a kid, right? And a lot. And the first one that was credible to me was the one that actually shared her story, right? She didn't have to give me a ton, but she gave me a little bit and didn't have a folder out that was already existing and sit behind a desk and already, in my 8th grade or 7th grade mind was prejudging me. And all of a sudden this one showed up differently. And, I know that this approach specifically for young adult men, probably women too, but specifically who we work with and who Jordan and Lenny work with, like, that is the approach. It's the relatability. It's the, I'm not pretending to be something that I am not.
Right.
Well,
And I also,
yeah.
go on, Jor.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I just, to piggyback on that, I think, that's the beauty of, all men's gender specific treatment is that, I think a lot of times guys will come in and they, have had a hard time with vulnerability with other men, and whether it's posturing, peacocking, insecurity, like Mark was saying, like, I think, when I came in, it was like, I spent my entire, life trying to probably borderline annoying, trying to be accepted by, my peers. And I think, I think that's the important thing about being a gender specific treatment is that, while they're with us at both of our programs, I'm sure they learn how to have real, authentic relationships, platonic relationships with other men in our program. I think that's super, super
So
important because,
important,
yeah,
that
yeah,
piece.
and yeah, exactly. Because, like I was saying earlier, if you had a woman in the group, not that everyone is straight in your programming, but if you had a woman in your group, a lot of the young guys would, act differently, say different things within process group, do anything they can to
100%.
impress the girl. I think that that is at the core of, not only, being able to, be authentic with the peer group, but also not having to impress anyone, show up how you are,
Right.
and be your true self, like, as opposed to what you believe people want to see.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that is more, that is what we see more in that's our philosophy behind gender specific treatment. And it's
And
what worked for me
yeah.
when I was going through this 15 years ago. I had a lot of humbling, to do. I think there was very grandiose in my storytelling when I first got the treatment. And I think, you know, talking about how great I was and all the great things that I did, we always talk about, yeah. Yeah, I mean, no, can you see it in my bookshelf behind me? It's a lot of Seahawks stuff these days. But, I think, we talk about how great we are, and being amongst other men that can, call you out and help you, humble you a little bit. I think that was really important for my story.
Right.
And then that was a big part of how important gender specific treatment is for us. So
And this is
I think
this is a subject I'm going to be diving into another episode to find out more about. But if you do have a young man who is, it's two different things, but if is questioning their sexuality or is gay, or you have a young man who recently identifies as a man, questioning their gender, or like, obviously sexuality is different from gender, but with the trans community, are you able to work with any of those guys, or you typically refer out?
Yeah. Typically, I want to have a longer conversation
This is
with,
a longer
like,
conversation.
well, I mean, it is. And typically our philosophy is that it's for gender,
Right.
co-ed environment has typically been a very good one. So we have referred out. And it's
Yeah.
a longer conversation of like
Yeah.
gathering more
We're gonna do another
information.
episode on that. I just, it's funny. I look back and, when I was in treatment, I was very confused about my sexuality. And at the time, I thought I liked boys and girls. And I remember the CEO of the treatment center was like, old school 12-step immersion guy. And he'd be like, Hannah, I used to say, boys stick with the boys and girls stick with the girls. But with you, I don't know what the fuck to do. So just look at the floor. And I was just like, okay. Because but having a safe place and having those guys feel comfortable and again, that's with when you're calling any of these programs, definitely wanting to assess, like, is this the right place for my son? I think also what you guys touched on, which was so important, was like, yes, the program was this and the staff was that, but literally there was two other women in my program who we were considered the tripod, and they are the ones that kept me sober and I kept them sober.
Yeah.
Sober. Like, that network was so important to me, of young women that I could relate to, that I could be friends with. And so it's like giving kind of, when we have a guy rushing to go back to school or rushing to go back wherever, it's just like, why? Why don't you grow and practice with other men just like you? So you don't feel like, that you're the odd man out, which isn't the case anymore.
Yeah, I
But
mean, there's a lot of positives around, like we call it a brotherhood here. And I know, Balance House shares this similar philosophy, but there's a lot, we try to take the positive, like there's a lot of positive things that come from fraternities. I mean, obviously there is some, negative things, of course, and same with like gangs or things like that. There's a lot of reasons why those work. Obviously at our programs, we want to only take the positive parts of those, but that's behind, we used to call ourselves a sober fraternity at Pace. Like there's, you know, pi alpha chi epsilon. I don't know if I really got that right, but there's pace lettering in Greek in our conference
right.
room. And because, again, we're treating a lot more mental health these days. So kind of the clients have shifted, but the idea remains the same, is that, they will be with other people that they can relate to and form friends that can trudge the road with them. And so, by looking up to somebody who, has something that you want, or is doing, something, like setting an example for you, of how to be, and and like, wow, that's what got me through early recovery. Is like, I think these guys are pretty cool. I'm going to do what they do. And so, just that simple thing. Obviously, there's a lot of clinical work, but just that simple thing about being within a brotherhood of men, like you were saying, that you can relate to, and that peer group that will help push you through the dark times, I think is so important. And I know that both Pace and Balance House, they have the similar things. Like we have we have rec league basketball, we have softball leagues, lots of experiential activities for the brotherhood as a whole. They go paintballing, they go karting. I know that they take, they take advantage of the mountains there. They're skiing together. I mean, all of those things are
You
so
also try to meet
important.
these guys where they are. Like, if you have an artistic kid, or if you have a kid
Yes.
who,
We
yeah,
have music group where we recording songs, and they can, it's definitely, ways for them to relate to their peers, where they can, formulate true connection is what we starve for. Yeah, I drank and drug me myself, for, to have a spiritual experience, basically. I realized back in, like when I'm really looking back at it, I wanted to have, a spiritual experience. And then, finding my connection to my higher power is what gives me my spiritual experience on a daily basis. And for the, they always say the opposite of addiction is connection. And I think that's so true for our guys. Like you want to be connected to something. And I think they come in very disconnected from, society, the world, their friends, how they actually want to be.
And I also want to stress this, we have a couple more questions, but really stress this, because I can see this already happening, and no judgment, but I need people to understand, and maybe you guys can better clarify what you're seeing. But, when we all went to treatment, it was like 12 steps, right? And we like did this and that. But today we're just seeing more of a complicated case, right? We're seeing more of a guy, even any woman, who needs real strong clinical work being in their program, as well as they can do 12 steps or some other. I mean, I'm a big believer. Yes, 12 steps works for me, doesn't have to be for everybody else. And so there's other options, but at the core, there has to be a good clinical program, because we need to find out what is kind of making all those symptoms come up, and I find that, you know, there are more people, if they're looking at faith-based treatment or 12-step immersion or anything like that. Again, there's nothing wrong about those programs, but as long as there's a clinical piece to it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is really parallel. I know it's annoying to say it over and over again, but it's the truth. If somebody had cancer, you wouldn't go to church instead of going to chemo. You just wouldn't. It's this, and I don't know how many times we have to say it. This is a disease of the brain. Your mental health, your substance use, whatever. It is the disease of the brain. And so the clinical piece is very important. What approaches, or how do you support the clinical piece in your programs?
Yeah, I think it's not, I mean, it's multifaceted. I've worked for a lot of programs. I've been doing this a long time, and there's like this buzzword that's called individualized treatment, right? Where it's like, we provide individualized, we actually do, right? And so what that means and what that looks like is that we have the client participate in like what's working for them. Right. And yeah, we do individual therapy, and all of our therapists are certified in everything under the moon. Right. But like EMDR for one guy might be effective, and for the other guy it might be the worst thing in the world. Right. So like we can't treat everyone the same, because it's not going to work. Every single guy is coming in as different. Right. They have a specific set of needs. And one of the things that drove me crazy was that when I went to treatment and when I would go to therapists, they asked every single person except for me what I needed, right?
Why?
Hey, I have a voice, right? But I think that sometimes we underestimate how much power clients have into who they are and what they need. Right. We just need to be able to give them access to do that. And we provide that space for them. Right. It's like physical safety and then emotional safety for every single guy. Right.
And I think it's important. Like any program that's, I remember we all had to drink the same Kool-Aid. Like every case was the same, and we all were treated the same. And I just feel like it's a term used a lot, but it's needed. Like everybody's different, and their individual needs are different. And with these, young men today, I mean, I don't know what you're seeing, but like a lot of
Yeah.
times, I would see more body dysmorphia and eating disorder with my guys than I would with the women,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for us, and I think, I completely agree with everything Mark just said. And, we believe exactly the same here. I think, one of the things that I love about PACE, for as long as I've been here, is that, the program, and we talked about Lenny a couple times, he is a therapist, so it's, and I know that the partners at the Balance House, they're therapists as well. So the PACE is a therapist owned and operated business. And so it always has been from the beginning about the clinical work. So you could come to PACE because we have PACE Academy, but we're a school program second. We're a surfing. You can come surf here, but that's second to the program. You can come, we're a treatment program first. So everything that we do here is going to be, from an actual, therapeutic lens. And, with the, medical team here, we have psychiatrists and nurses, full-time nursing, 24-hour nursing now, because of the acuity of the clients that we're seeing. And so all the decisions are made by a multidisciplinary team who meet every single week at treatment team to discuss, how is this person doing clinically? And then we can, build from there. And, one of the things I wanted to add earlier was, I know that Bounce House and PACE, we've been known to treat cannabis-induced psychosis, which is, one of the, most prominent things that, young people are dealing with today because of the weaponized THC. It's not the weed that you and I smoked, or that I smoked 15 years ago, that you guys smoked longer ago, because long-term sobriety in this Zoom. You're still beautiful, Mark. But no, but it's 99% concentrate. So I'd say 30% or more of our programs are just filled with cannabis and psychosis. And we know it, from the research, that it takes at least 6 months to figure out, is this an organic issue or is this drug induced? And so it's another feather in the cap for long-term treatment, is to figure out actually what's going on with these young people, young men in our case. And so you look at our staff page, it's like, multiple psychiatrists, doctors and master level therapists. We have, certified drug and alcohol counselors, certified counselors who are the case managers. And so, with the heavy acuity of, with the higher acuity of clients that were coming in these days, it just takes a lot more clinical work to be able to treat. And so, like, all of the decisions around, are they able to have this privilege or that privilege is done from, in a clinical lens. Like, just because
I'll say it, you guys might not say it. There are many, many men and women that I know, including me. I mean, thank God I did more work on myself, who are quote unquote sober, who collect a chip, right? But could use some clinical work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, who didn't get that? And so I find that really important. The last episode I gave in the show notes a really lengthy, great list of questions for families to ask when they're calling admission centers for adolescent and young adult programs. And the clinical piece is very, very, very important. So I will stress that. Also, before we leave, I wanted to ask you guys something that you guys probably also run up against is, there's still such a stigma for young men, right? To work on their mental health. If I into a young man, it's always, the safe word is anxiety. They can't say depression. Anxiety is the word that's safe, but they're like, what strategies are used to encourage these guys to participate, to like really to embrace, to help the stigma, I guess you could say?
Yeah. Real quick, I just want to dip back for 1 second and just talk about the pot use. That is the most common thing that we're seeing. And one of the things that I want families to hear is that, this is not the pot of the 90s, right? Like, this pot is being created by scientists, not your local hippie that was growing pot. Right. So, like, it is a totally different drug than it used.
There's no more swag. There's no more swag.
Listen, and for some people they can handle it, and some people they can't. I'm not saying handle it, but I feel like I remember my old clinical director used to say, like, if you have a child or your family, there's bipolar in your family and you're predisposed for that, like, your kids should not even go anywhere near that. You know what I mean? Because it unleashes this dragon. And I've seen it. Some cases, I had a kid who was like he was like the captain of the debate team at Duke. And he came to us. He didn't, for 6 months, because of a THC psychosis, couldn't identify his mother and father. And it happens.
Well, you have to, and if you're a family picking, like Mark was saying, it's like mostly pot around here these days, but if you're a family picking a treatment program for your son who might have psychosis or other negative, impacts of marijuana, you want to be very sure that the clinical team is equipped to treat. The clinical and medical team is equipped to treat that first before anything else, because all the other stuff sounds great, skiing and the whatever else is going on. But if they're not treating that, there is no way are they able to even take, part in those things. And then also that's the most important thing to treat.
And that's really important to stress, because I know, and I'm not going to mention names, but certain people on the Hill who are in charge of our health department in this country are looking, there is a trajectory of opening up 60 something faith-based treatment centers all over America as an expansion of mental health benefits to make America healthy again. I'm, again, not anti it, as long as there's a very, very, very strong clinical program involved.
One of the most common things that I see, and, Jordan, you tell me if you see this too, is a lack of purpose with our guys. right? Like they wake up every single day and they're surrounded by mediocrity because they
Right.
just don't feel like they're fulfilling, right? Like all of us were put here for a reason, right? Whatever that is. And all of us have different gifts and different things to be able to give away. And our goal is to chase that purpose, right? And what makes us happiest as humans, once we heal, right? Once we have the opportunity to heal, is to be able to use whatever gift we have, whatever that is, to make the world a better place, right? Like some people are great musicians and they're great teachers, or they're this. And once they use that to either teach people and or make their life better, that is what genuinely, for
So
me,
true.
makes me happy as a human.
I remember my counselor was like, Hannah, what do you like? I was like, I don't know. And he's like, what don't you like? I was like, I
Yeah,
don't.
I mean, yeah, that's the whole, and I do want to touch on the stigma question. I think it's a good one, but that's the whole crux of, the issue, at least for me, and I think a lot of people, is like, what do you want to do yourself? Not what do you think society wants you to do?
Right.
Or what do you think, what do you, not what, you think your friends will think you're cool for doing, you
Parents,
know,
just the
people
massage.
pleasing.
That
Parents,
parents,
you know,
yes,
what do you, in that, and our guys, I think, and I think to some extent, a lot of us who are going through this woke up that way, feeling, like, surrounded, no purpose, like even with a really good degree, no purpose. So I think that, that's a big part of what these young guys, even, 18 to 40 now, are doing here at, at our programs.
Well, I just want to say I'm really grateful to have you both on to talk about young men's treatment. At the end of this, we're going to have show notes with both your links so people can utilize both resources at Balance House or at Pace Recovery Center. And I want to thank you again for both being here. I love you madly.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Connect Call. As we conclude, remember that insights shared are intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We strongly recommend consulting a qualified medical health professional or healthcare provider for personalized advice tailored to your unique needs. Your mental health journey is important, and having the right support is essential. If you're experiencing a mental health crisis or require immediate assistance, please reach out to a mental health provider or emergency services in your area. We're grateful to have you as part of our community, and your well-being remains our priority. So follow us on social media to stay connected, and be sure to catch one of our episodes on our YouTube channel. We're here to support you every step of the way.